We are now on the second piece of the reproductive system lecture. We just finished with the female reproductive system, and now we're moving on to the male. Let us start with a general overview. The gonad for males is the testes, and by gonads, I mean that's the one that produces the sex cells, in this case sperm, and it also produces hormones, in this case testosterone. And then most of the other structures are a series of ductwork that move the sperm up and out. And then we also have a set of 3 glands, and their job is to produce seminal fluid. Okay, so we're going to look at them more specifically, starting with the testes. For the testes, there are 3 different layers of protection. We have the scrotum on the outside. That's that fold of skin that holds the testes outside of the body. The reason it's on the outside of the body is because that helps keep it cool, because the process of producing sperm works much better if it's at a temperature that's lower than normal, body temperature. Works best in body temperature. So it holds it outside of the body, and that's what keeps it cool. So that's the scrotum. Then we have the tunica vaginalis. Tunica, like tunic, just means coat or layer. And vaginalis is because it invaginates, which just means that it goes down into it and then kind of comes back out. Okay, it invaginates. And because it goes down into it and comes back out, that creates 2 layers. So there's a pair of layers. We have the parietal layer on the outside, and then the visceral layer on the inside. And you've seen those words before. It's the same words and the same idea from these serous membranes. And so the visceral layer of the tunica vaginalis would be really, really stuck on the outside of what's called the tunica albuginea, and which kind of translates to white coat. So tunica as in coat again, or layer, and then albuginea, that means white. And the way I remember this, and it's a little odd, I think of like egg whites. Egg whites are made up of albumin, which is a white protein. So albu as in white, so albuginea as in white coat. Okay, so that creates a very, very tough fibrous layer that encloses the outside of the testes. I think of the same type of material that makes up the dura mater inside on top of the brain. So the same kind of white, tough outer layer here. You can see it being pinched in these forceps here. That's the tunica albuginea. Now, inside the testes, we have a big coil of tubes that are called seminiferous tubules, and that is where the sperm is going to be produced. Okay, so in this picture right here, so here's the testes. These are the seminiferous tubules all coiled up. If you take a cross-section through the tubule, right, cross-section through, this is what you would see. This is histology of inside the testes. So this big one here, that would be a seminiferous tubule. And the really cool thing about this is that you can actually follow the maturation of making those sperm. Okay, so the process of making sperm is called spermatogenesis. Genesis as in to make, spermato as in spermatocyte. So those are the sperm, making sperm. They're not quite sperm yet, but we're making them. And so the really cool thing is the stem cells to make the sperm, they are found along the outside, the edge of the seminiferous tubule. And as we go in, we can see their further development as they mature. And even here we have the very beginnings of the sperm cells. So now technically they're not quite fully mature yet. They actually don't mature until they get to the epididymis, which is over here. But look, they can already start to see the little tails sticking out into the lumen of the seminiferous tubules. Okay, so we have those little spermatozoa, which will eventually become mature sperm. They're going to flow through those seminiferous tubules. Now, so that's where the sperm is going to be produced. Now, remembering that the testes is also creates hormones. Okay, so it's also an endocrine gland. And those are produced by cells that are sandwiched between the seminiferous tubules called Leydig cells, or sometimes called Sertoli cells. And those are going to produce the testosterone right in between there. Okay, so both sperm and testosterone produced in the testes. Okay, let's take a look at the sperm themselves. So they have three general regions. We have a head, which is this part here. So there's the head. We have a mid piece, which is this first initial fat segment. And then we have a tail coming off of that. Okay, so in the head, we have the majority of the head is taken up by the nucleus, because really the point of the sperm is to deliver that nucleus, deliver the genetic material to the egg so you can make a new person. So most of the structure, most of that head is taken up by the nucleus. It also has a little cap on the top that's called the acrosome or the acrosome, and that's going to contain hydrolytic enzymes. So hydrolytic just means it does hydrolysis, which just means it breaks things apart. And so those enzymes are going to help with breaking into the egg during fertilization. Okay, so that's going to be in the acrosome, okay, which is the little tip, the little domed tip at the very top of the head. In the mid piece, that's where you're going to have a lot of mitochondria. Remember that mitochondria, the powerhouse of the cell, they produce energy. And then in there, we have the mechanisms for moving the tail. Now, the tail itself is just a flagella. Flagella just means a long extension of that plasma membrane. And the purpose of the tail is for locomotion, for swimming. And so that is going to move the sperm along through the female reproductive tract until it can encounter an egg, hopefully. So we have head, mid-piece, swimming tail. Okay, so what I want you to do is see if you can remember that. Could you write it down? What's the function of the head, the tail, and the acrosome? Okay, so for the head, that's going to contain the nucleus, kind of keeping in mind that the whole point of the sperm is to deliver that genetic material to the egg so that you can create a new person. We have the tail. The tail is how it's going to get there, locomotion, which just means that the entire cell is moving. Okay, so locomotion just means movement of the whole cell, in this case, like a swimming motion. And then we have the acrosome, and the acrosome is part of the head, and it contains digestive enzymes that will eat away at the outside of the egg and allow for penetration to fertilize the egg. So it's quite remarkable. Like every single part of the sperm is set up so it's really, really efficient at delivering that genetic material, which is awesome. Okay, now we need to make sure that the sperm get where it needs to go. So here the sperm are produced in the seminiferous tubules, which are found inside of the testes. They will then travel to the epididymis, epi as in like outermost. I think of it like a little hat that kind of sits around it. And so this whole structure here surrounding the kind of the top portion of the testes, that's the epididymis. That is where the sperm will finish their maturation. They'll become full-on swimming sperm. That's kind of a coil inside of that helps with that too. So there's the epididymis. From there, it's going to travel. So at this point, remember, it's inside the scrotum, right? Outside the body. We need to make our way into the body. Okay, so it's going to travel through a duct that's called the ductus deferens. Now, the ductus deferens used to be called the vas deferens. Okay, so, and I think that has to do with the fact that when they first were looking at it, and they first doing their dissections, this ductus deferens is kind of bundled with some arteries and nerves and veins in there, and so I think they just sort of assumed that it was part of the circulatory system. So the ductus deferens have now been changed in their name. We call them ductus deferens, not vas deferens. But because of that vas deferens kind of sticking in the collective minds of people, we still use the term vasectomy. Okay, so an ectomy just means you take out that piece. So vasectomy, what that really means is here is the scrotum here. Okay, they make a little incision in that scrotum, pull out the ductus deferens, and then either cut or solder or may sometimes clamp the ductus deferens, and so that the sperm that is produced just can't come out. Okay, so if you do go to vasectomy, that's a really, really efficient and what's the word? Not efficient, but effective way to prevent pregnancy. Okay, because you're still producing the sperm, but it's just not making its way out. It can't come out. For people with vasectomy, they still have their glands intact, so they're still producing seminal fluid. Okay, so you still have ejaculations, but it just doesn't contain the sperm because there's no way for it to come out. Also, your testes are still fully intact so that means that you're still producing hormones. Okay, so it does not affect the hormones level. And the other thing is it's not castration, right? Your penis is still fully intact. Okay, the only thing is that the sperm cannot come out. Okay, so my PSA for right now is the vasectomy is a relatively safe procedure, very effective at preventing pregnancy, which is not the same as tying your tubes, which when they cut the fallopian tubes or the uterine tubes, which is a much more dangerous procedure because you have to cut into the abdominal pelvic cavity, which is huge risk of infection, right? So my mother actually had a really big problem with this. So maybe consider vasectomy as an alternative. I'm just putting that out there. Okay, so we talked about the ductus deferens, and then from the ductus deferens, it's going to flow through a little tiny short tube, join up with the urethra, and then from the urethra, it'll go out. Okay, so let's talk about its pathway into the, excuse me, into the abdominal pelvic cavity. Okay, so remember it starts outside of the body. Again, the reason it's outside is to help keep the sperm cool while they are being produced. It helps with production. Now, it's going to travel through a little, so think of the scrotum outside. It's going to travel through a little structure that's called the spermatic cord. Okay, so looking at this right here, so on the other end of here, this would be where the testes is. This right here, this structure is the spermatic cord, and that's that bundle of both the ductus deferens as well as the gonadal arteries and veins. They're all wrapped together in one connective tissue. And then it's going to travel through this hole in the abdominal pelvic cavity, basically, which is called the inguinal canal. So inguinal as in like your groin, and canal as in like a passageway. Okay, so that's going to travel, and then it'll be inside of the abdominal pelvic cavity. Now, in some cases, there can be problems where the inguinal canal gets torn or enlarged in some way. And what can happen if it's bad enough is sometimes the intestines can poke through the inguinal canal. This actually happened to one of my associates at UOG, the University of Guam, and he told me it was just the most painful thing ever. Okay, so we're looking at this picture here. Here's the pubic symphysis. So this is a sagittal section. Here would be the inguinal canal. Here's just a little piece of the small intestine poking through. And so in order to fix this, they had to go in and do a surgery where they reinforce that inguinal canal with some mesh. And it's fairly effective, but it also is, quite painful. That's called an inguinal hernia. Okay, inguinal hernia as in something's coming through. Okie dokie, let's see, where are we? Okay, so now we're talking about accessory glands. So at this point, we've got the sperm coming up from the ductus deferens. It loops over the, loops over the ureter and comes down. Okay, at this point, we just have the sperm. We don't have semen yet. Okay, so semen means a mixture of sperm plus the seminal fluid that are there to protect and nourish and help it flow out. Okay, so there are 3 glands that are going to produce that seminal fluid. Okay, the first one is the prostate gland. That's the biggest one here. So there's that prostate gland. The prostate gland surrounds the urethra, and that's why sometimes if you have an enlarged prostate, it makes it really hard to pee because it's pushing and squeezing on that urethra there. Another one is the seminal vesicles, and the seminal vesicles are found on the posterior side, so the back side of the urinary bladder. Okay, those are the seminal vesicles there. Okay, notice that the ductus deferens kind of pass through the seminal vesicles. And then the last one is the bulbourethral glands. Okay, bulba as in making a little bulb, the shape, and urethral gland because it's down here with the urethra. So that is going to be that little small one here. Okay, so I'll point that out for you on the sagittal section as well. Okay, so let's talk about the urethra. That's that last little segment where the sperm journeys to exit. So at this point, we have both the sperm from the ductus deferens, we have the seminal fluid coming in from the 3 different glands. Now we've got our semen and it needs to come out, and it's going to come out through the urethra. And there are 3 different parts, 3 different regions of the urethra. The first is the prostatic urethra. So it's called the prostatic urethra because it's surrounded by the prostate. That's this one right here. That's going to join up with the ejaculatory duct coming in from the seminal vesicles. Okay, and the sperm is going to be coming with that. And then we have the intermediate, or sometimes called the membranous urethra. That's going to be this middle part here before it goes through where the penis would be. This is called the bulb of the penis for here. And that becomes the spongy urethra. And the reason it's called the spongy urethra is because it's surrounded by a structure. So you have that right here. That's called the corpus spongiosum. Okay, so let me talk about the penis and we'll kind of tie those 2 things together. Okay, so here is the penis. The penis is for sex. It's also for ejaculation. And so that's where the sperm, the urethra is going to run through that one. And the penis has this enlarged tip, which is called the glans. Okay, so that's the glans right there. If you are uncircumcised, the glans, unless you're erect, the glans is going to be covered by a little fold of skin. And that fold of skin is called the prepuce, or usually more often people call it the foreskin. So if you become circumcised, that's the part that's going to be cut off. So the prepuce or the foreskin will be snipped off, and then that way it's not going to have that protective sheath on the outside. Okay, so let's talk about the erectile tissue inside of the penis. Okay, so just to orient ourselves, here's the penis. Here's would be the bulb of the penis down here. If we take a cross section through, okay, so cross section through, now we can see the 3 erectile tissues inside. Okay, so this right here, it's kind of collapsed because it's not currently being used. That would be where the urethra is. There's the urethra right there. That's where the sperm would exit out, as well as the pee, by the way. Surrounding around that, we have the corpus spongiosum. Corpus just means like a body. Spongiosum because it looks like spongy tissue. That's the corpus spongiosum right around the urethra. Then we have 2 larger erectile tissues, and the erectile tissue, those 2 larger ones are called the corpus cavernosum. Okay, so corpora, if it's plural, if you're talking about both of them. If you're talking about one of them, it's the corpus cavernosum. And it's called that cavernosum like a cavern, right? Like something like a cave, kind of. And the way that the erectile tissues work is that during an erection, the arteries feeding the penis are enlarged, dilate, and then the veins that drain it away are constricted. Okay, so the combination of dilating the arteries and constricting the veins means that all the blood coming in is going to get trapped, and it's going to get trapped into these little cavernous spaces inside of the corpus cavernosum. And that's why it's hard, right? There's no bones. Okay, and I've heard that sometimes. There's nothing hard really in there. It's just full of blood. That's what an erection is. By the way, the female homologous structure for females is the clitoris, and it has the same type of thing, right? You've got blood coming in, can't get out, just gets trapped into these little cavernous spaces, and that's what creates an erection. Okay, let's see, where are we? Okay, let's just go ahead and stop and do a little mini review. Okay, so again, I really would like you to pause, see if you can identify these structures, and then I'll go over it. Okay, hopefully welcome back. Okay, so just to orient ourselves, we are now looking at a sagittal section, right? A sagittal section through. And so A would be the urinary bladder. Okay, so if this is the urinary bladder, what would this be? That would be the ureter. Notice that the ductus deferens loops over the ureter and then kind of joins in with what's coming out of the seminal, I'm going to give away the answer, the seminal vesicles, and to form the ejaculatory duct, and then joins up with the prostatic urethra and then continues on. Okay, so here's the urinary bladder. B would then be the prostate, right? That's that big structure. Notice how it surrounds the urethra. And again, that's why it's hard to pee when you have an enlarged prostate. And then so C again would be the seminal vesicles, okay? And then so D would be part of the urethra, but which part, which region? Spongy urethra, okay? So we have, excuse me, we have the prostatic urethra around the prostate. We have the intermediate urethra, also known as the membranous urethra, right here in the middle. And then once it enters and is surrounded by this corpus spongiosum, that part of so this, you see the textured part of the penis there, that's the corpus spongiosum. So inside of this corpus spongiosum, that's the spongy urethra. Spongy urethra. That's the tube that the sperm, as well as the pee, would come out. And so for this structure, for this E, we skipped E. E is for epididymis. Okay, so this part, this rounded part, that would be the testes. And so the epididymis is just this, what I like to think of like the hat that sits on top, although it's maybe more like a scarf because it comes down like here. So that is the epididymis. That is where the sperm is matured. And then F is looking for just this enlarged rounded tip of the penis, and that would be the glans penis. Okay, so testes produces the sperm. The sperm goes to the epididymis to get mature, travels through the ductus deferens, joins up with the seminal fluid coming from the seminal vesicles, the prostate, and the bulbourethral gland. Then it's going to travel out through the urethra. And that's pretty much it. Oh, yes, same thing. Okay, that's enough for now.